From News 9, this is breaking news.
Breaking news now in the high-profile case of death row inmate Richard Glossip.
Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond is asking the Court of Criminal Appeals to set aside his conviction.
News 9's Dana Hurtnick has been following this story for several years now. She's in studio with the very latest. Dana.
In Colby, this comes as the AG releases the result of a special investigation his office commissioned, and that special investigator has said that the case should be set aside and retried. Richard Glossip has been on death row now for nearly 27 years and nearly executed 3 different times. The last time was just minutes away from death when Governor Mary Fallin spared his life because of a mix-up with the execution drugs. Glossip has maintained his innocence this whole time. Prosecutors say he paid another man, Justin Sneed, to kill Barry Van Treese. The case based largely on the testimony of Sneed, who agreed to testify against Glossip in order to avoid the death penalty for himself. A recent investigation commissioned by a group of Republican lawmakers revealed Sneed had several times asked about recanting his testimony, most recently in the late summer. Now, following that investigation, early this year, Drummond appointed a special counsel to conduct a thorough review of the case. And as part of those court papers that we just received, that independent review said the case should be set aside. Now, a court of criminal appeals will now have to rule on the AG's request. If they grant it, the case will go back to the Oklahoma County District Attorney's Office. Behanna will have to decide if she should refile charges and try to try the case again, or let Glossip go free. Big developments here that has been actually decades in the making, at least in Colby.
Dana, with the state of Oklahoma and AG Drummond saying that they are setting aside Richard Glossip's conviction and remanding the case to the district court. If you're with us here, I wanted to ask a quick question about DA Vicki Behanna. We know she is new in office. There was much debate leading into her election to that office. Have we heard if she had made any public comments as to what she would do if something like this were to occur?
I don't think that she has said publicly one way or another, Lisa, but you do know that she headed up the Innocence Project. Although Glossip's case was not part of the Innocence Project, that does maybe give you some sort of insight into how she views these type of cases. But once again, she has not said one way or another how she would proceed if this case did come back to her office. But if the Court of Criminal Appeals makes a decision and sends it back, it will be up to her to make the next decision on Richard Glossip's life. Lisa.
Dana, thank you. I know that's one of the questions. Of course, we'll be continuing to work to get those answers, and we'll bring that to you as well. But this is not the first time that the case has been set aside, or the conviction has been set aside and then retried, essentially. This also happened before.
It's happened before. There have been many legal setbacks. We want to talk a little bit about the timeline because it's very complex when you talk about more than 25 years that this case has gone on.
Right, and back and forth with a lot of legal stuff. So let's start with 1997. This is where the case began. A man named Barry Van Treese was beaten to death in the hotel he owned. It's right here in Oklahoma City. The man that Dana just talked about, Justin Sneed, who worked maintenance there, confessed to doing it. But as a part of a plea deal, he pointed the finger at the manager there, that manager, Richard Glossip. Sneed said that he was the mastermind, essentially, that Glossip was the mastermind behind it. In 1998, a jury convicted Glossip, and at that point, he was sentenced to death.
But that conviction was overturned in 2001 with the Court of Criminal Appeals remanding a new trial back then due to ineffective counsel. Now, evidence to support Sneed's testimony was also found to be extremely weak. Glossip was then tried again in 2004, convicted and sentenced to death.
So let's jump forward a decade later. This is in 2014 when he had his execution date. See, that was stayed in 2014 as the state at that point obtained lethal injection drugs. The next year, 2015, Glossip received a stay of execution as well. This time, it was because the U.S. Supreme Court was reviewing the state's lethal injection protocol. Glossip was named as a plaintiff on that case. Now, ultimately, the Supreme Court found the protocol did not violate the Constitution. But over the course of 2015, the execution was stayed 3 times, even reprieved once at the very last minute.
Then just last year, the execution was reprieved twice by Governor Kevin Stitt in order to allow the Court of Appeals to review new evidence in the case. And in January, the newly appointed Attorney General Gentner Drummond requested execution dates for Glossip and 6 other inmates be pushed back. This was to give some reprieve to the Department of Corrections, saying that it was not going to be sustainable to execute in the timeframes that they had set aside. So Glossip's February execution date was then moved from February to May 18th. That's where it stands until today. More recently, Drummond hired independent to review Glossip's claims. And then just last week, the AG requested another delay, August 2024, for that execution date to be set then to allow for an independent investigation. And then here, that brings us to today, where we're seeing the results of that independent investigation.
Right. I want to point out, as they mentioned right here in this report, that the state is not suggesting that Glossip is innocent of any charges made against him. In fact, the state says it continues to believe that Glossip has culpability in the murder of Barry Van Treese, but disagrees with the conclusions reached, by some of the conclusions reached with the independent counsel. Of course, we'll be following that and what those conclusions are. But when we talk about of it being stayed, right? This happened 8 times that the date was set for execution and it was moved. Of course, we talked about the most recent now moving from February to May. 3 of the times it was in motion. We're talking about reprieval. Once in 2015, he'd already had his last meal. It looked like things were moving forward. The governor stepped in due to some mix-up with the lethal injection drugs. But 2015, also the last time that we spoke with the family of the victim here, Barry Van Treese.
They have endured several legal setbacks along the way. We last talked with Barry Van Treese's wife in 2015. Here's what she had to say.
There'll never be closure to this, really. You know, this is a fact of life that every member of my family, every member of Barry's family, we live this on a daily basis.
Now, we have not yet been able to visit with Donna Van Treese today or any of their 5 children she was left to raise on her own when Barry Van Treese's life was taken back in 1997. She did go on to tell us in that interview back in 2015 that as for her 5 children, their dad got stolen. But before we get to that, we want to talk about how I know that this all happens for a reason. We may not know the reason. We may never know the reason, but there's anger that you want it to be over with. You want this part to be finished. You want to be able to take a breath and to carry on knowing that justice has been served. That is what Donna Van Treese has said along the way. And when she talks about raising those 5 children, Colby, she did that all on her own. Right, saying that their dad got stolen from them and that no child should ever have to be told that their dad is not coming home again. And again, that was nearly 8 years ago, was the time that we were able to speak with them. That was in 2015. Much happened since, of course, the 2 reprieves that happened last year, moving into the latest now that just came from the Attorney General's office requesting that this conviction be set aside and it would go back to the district attorney. Let's talk with Haley Wager. She is at the Capitol right now, our Capitol reporter. Excuse me, she's at the Criminal Court of Appeals, I should say, Haley. As this came down, have you reached out to the governor? That's sort of what we're wondering at this point. Have you talked with anybody there? What is the reaction at this point?
You know, the governor is actually in Lawton right now. My step 1 was to reach out to the governor's communication staff. This was just minutes ago that I was able to send that text waiting for these documents. So I have not heard back from them yet, but I am just like you wanting to know kind of what is the next step from their side.
Haley, while we have you here as well, we wanted to ask, as this came down, what is the atmosphere there like? Is there reaction so far just within the halls?
You know what, I've actually been the only one down here today. I haven't seen any media down here. It's really, I would say it's certainly quiet other than me and the people working in this building. I was expecting a lot more uproar. You know, this is a pretty big break in this case, but it's still pretty quiet. Now we'll see once I go outside and I'm able to, once this really breaks and people start figuring out about it. But right now I would say it's fairly quiet. It's really just me down here in the basement right now.
Haley Wager there at the Court of Criminal Appeals. Haley, thank you. We'll continue to check in with you throughout the day as those updates come in as well. We'll share them with you both here and over on the News 9 app as well.
Certainly, this is a developing story as we're just now getting this document in hand to review. So we're going to rally and bring you more reports as we go throughout the day. So you'll want to make sure you download the News 9 app and also follow along on news9.com and keep it right here on News 9.